Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this our webinar from ICF Orange County chapter. My name is Dave Huxtable, and I'm the president of the chapter. And it gives me great pleasure this morning to introduce James Garrett, who is going to act as a synthesizer for us this morning and take complicated science and process it so that we can apply it to our coaching. So without any more from me, welcome, James.
Thank you. So glad to be here, and thank you everybody for joining. Thank you for the kind introduction. I have been a student of the brain for decades, and spent a lot of time doing research in research labs around the country, and have really fallen in love with how to make science simple. Brain science can be fairly complicated. It's very valuable, but the question is, how do you create that bridge in a coaching setting? So I'm a coach myself, so I know that the challenges that this can pose. And so today we're going to be talking about mini habits and how to use habits and habit formation as a tool, right? A tool that you can use with your clients. So let me just jump right to the screen share here. And again, this is a habits overview. There's lots of different tools within the habits toolkit, but mini habits is one of them, and we're going to dive into why they work, how they kind of rely on some of the best or most interesting psychology and brain science, and again, how to actually use this with your clients. So let's get started. So one of the questions I get from a lot of people is, why habits to begin with? What is it about habits and the brain that makes habit or habit formation, getting good at habit formation, this kind of master tool or sort of meta skill set? And one of the things that is really important to understand about habits is that your brain is really this habit-making machine. Your brain will make habits with or without your permission. That's true for all of us. And so the question is, how do you get in control of that process? How do you actually get in the driver's seat of that process? And most of what we're going to be talking about today is about that difference. Somebody asked, what is my full name? My full name is James Garrett. I apologize. It only says James on the presenter. Full name is James Garrett, 2 R's and 2 T's. And again, the company that I run is called Brain by Design. My coaching website specifically is coaches.brainbydesign.com. So again, how do we get in the driver's seat of that process, and why does your brain love habits? Your brain is essentially an energy Scrooge. Brains hate expending energy, right? They don't like to use energy up if they don't have to. So conscious decisions, things that lie up here in this realm, are effortful and they're difficult. So anytime your brain can push a conscious decision into the unconscious, which is where habits lie, right? That's why they're so powerful. It will, and again, it will do this automatically with or without your permission. And so, again, let me give you a small example. Well, let me do it this way. I created a habit by default about a year or two ago, and that was we started buying these really delicious dark chocolate, bars that we started putting in our pantry. It was called Equal Exchange Chocolates. One of these fairly traded chocolate companies, incredibly delicious. These particular chocolate bars the beans were just from Panama. Obviously a nice treat. And I started breaking off one row of chocolate every night right before bed. And I only did this, in the beginning, it was only, 1 or 2 times, after we started buying them. but within a week, my brain had basically spotted this pattern that right before bed or around, after I put our daughter to bed, I would go into the pantry and break off this bar of chocolate. And so as brains do, my brain doesn't want to make a decision to eat the chocolate every night. That's a lot of work. Decisions are incredibly taxing for the brain. And so eventually my brain, again, outsourced that decision-making responsibility to my unconscious or subconscious brain. And I created a habit by default, right? That was not an intentional habit to eat a row of chocolate, but sure enough, over time, eventually I started craving chocolate right around 9 or 10 at night. And I would find myself wandering into the pantry. Now, this is really interesting because this was not a habit, what I would consider a habit by design, right? I didn't mean to create this habit. This was not intentional, but it was, in fact, did become a pretty well-formed habit. There's this brilliant quote by Donald Hebb, a Canadian neuroscientist, who said, "Neurons that fire together wire together." So think of what's actually going on in my brain, right? I've got these timing neurons responsible for keeping track of time. And then I've got my chocolate neurons that are responsible for recognizing the flavor and sensation of eating chocolate. They're not actually physically linked in my head, right? They're actually physically separate. But the more I do these two things at the same time, my 9 p.m., my kind of right before bed neurons are actually starting to think that they're supposed to connect with or grow new dendritic or dendrite connections to my other neurons. And eventually they link up physically in the brain. So again, a habit is simply that. It's simply two things that were unrelated somehow become linked. And your brain, because it believes it's supposed to repeat patterns that you've done in the past and make them easier to do in the future, your brain does this, again, unconsciously and automatically. So how do you actually get in the driver's seat of this process? Because we all have, habits that maybe we're not as excited about, or sometimes we call them bad habits. But how do we actually get good at designing our habits and helping others design theirs? I want to ask this question, which is, how long do you believe a habit takes to form? So there's a little chat box. If you hover over at the very bottom, there's a little chat box. Just type in your answer. I get answers that are all over the map, so literally feel free to shoot. 30 days. Julie says 30 days. Susan says 7 weeks. Mike says 21 days. 21 days is a very common one, Mike. Vicky, 4 weeks. Anna, 30 times, so 30 repetitions. I like that. Regina, 7 days. Good. There's a big range here. Yeah, I love it. Jill says 7 weeks. Interesting. 7 days to 7 weeks. That's kind of the range. The science on this is really fascinating. What scientists, so 21 days for many years was something that scientists believed, or that people sort of collectively believed, and it was sort of peddled in many ways by the self-help industry. Largely because it's more attractive, right? 21 days sounds better. 3 weeks sounds like less effort. It's going to sell a little better, right? But the latest science, the best science on this says 66 days. So 66 days, roughly 2 months. So those 7-week answers were pretty close. Just over 2 months. This is an average, right? So harder habits might take a little bit more time. Easier habits, maybe a little bit less. So if the new habit was, drinking a bottle of water, let's say, every morning just to rehydrate right when you wake up, that's a fairly straightforward behavior, right? Nothing terribly complicated about filling it up in the fridge and then putting it on your nightstand, drinking it when you get up. Even if you're sick, you're probably going to go ahead and do it anyways. Getting to the gym for an hour a day, that's a different story, right? For most of us. And it's more complicated. There's scheduling involved. It's usually outside of your where you're actually, living or working. There's gym clothes, to prep, to wash, to maintain. There's also the motivation, right? Working out is hard, at least if you haven't done it in a while. And so there's all these things that can get in the way. So it's possible that may take a little bit more, but again, 2 months is a good rule of thumb. So why does it take this long? What's actually going on in the brain? And this is the deepest we're going to get into kind of the brain science, the neuroscience. I don't want to get too technical here. But this analogy, this metaphor will help you kind of help it land. And it will help it when you're working with clients. It will help understand why it takes so long for this process to kind of stabilize and a new habit to form. So I want you to imagine this is many of you have probably driven from where you live. I don't know if you all live in Orange County, but I'm sure a lot of you do. From Orange County to Las Vegas, right? So this is I-15. This is what it looks like for a good portion of the drive. I'm sure all of you know this beautiful view I'm showing here. I want you to imagine you're driving on I-15. I want you to imagine pulling over to the side of the road. Pull over to the side of the road and actually start driving on the sagebrush. Okay, let's imagine you're in a Jeep or something that has a little bit more lift. And you're trying to get to Las Vegas, but on the sagebrush. All right? So what instantly happens to the speed of the car? How fast are you going at this point? And again, feel free to type in the chat box. I'll try to make this as interactive as I can. You were going about 80. What's happening now? Rosie slows down, slower and rough. Susan, yeah, you're probably going, maybe 5 to 10 miles an hour. If you're lucky, you're obviously being careful about boulders and bumps. Not in my car, nearly halting to a stop, not to mention dips and dives, lurches, depending on, exactly the car you're driving. It's not pleasant, right? Fair to say. Everything in you wants to get back on I-15 because when you're driving on I-15, you don't have to think about it, right? You can listen to a nice, song by Coldplay. You can have a nice conversation with your significant other or a friend. You can do other things. You don't have to be so vigilantly focused on what's right in front of you. But here's what's so fascinating, right? If you drive on the same pathway again and again and again, and if enough traffic, maybe enough cars actually follow you on this pathway, something interesting will happen. Eventually, by sheer force of physics, tire tracks will form, all right? So tire tracks will form. Again, this isn't magic. There's nothing, crazy going on here. This is just usage. This is a use-dependent phenomenon. So now, because there's actually tire tracks, you can pick up the speed a little bit, maybe to 20 miles an hour. You're not quite as nervous because there have been a lot of cars that have been there before. But if you keep doing this, or enough cars keep doing this, eventually a fully formed dirt road will actually form. And at this point, maybe you can go 30 to 40 miles an hour, say if you're in a big truck. Now, if this keeps happening, and there's enough demand, enough usage between, again, Orange County and Las Vegas, there's this new route, let's say. The Nevada Department of Transportation eventually is going to be like, wow, well, why don't we just pave this, this new pathway? There's obviously demand for it. There's obviously a need. So let's invest resources. Let's pave this pathway. And at this point, you can go maybe 60 miles an hour, right? 60, 70. And again, if there's even more demand and more traffic, over time, they'll even expand it into a multi-lane freeway. So what does this have to do with brains? Your brain is nothing more than a complex interconnected web of neural tire tracks, dirt roads, 2-lane highways, and 6-lane freeways. Yeah? What I mean by that is there are behaviors, thought patterns, emotional patterns that get used all the time. And so, think of the habit of brushing your teeth. if you were to look at that, on a microscopic level on the brain, it would look a lot like this 6-lane freeway you're seeing running down the middle of this picture. So when you're, the question I often ask is, how many of you had to actually decide or think about whether or not you were actually going to brush your teeth this morning? Right? It would have been weird not to. It would have felt awkward. You would have felt uncomfortable or like something was off. Yeah. So that's what a fully formed, really strong habit feels like. It feels like you can do it and your mind is usually thinking about something else. It's automatic and, again, unconscious, super easy to do. Whereas, again, getting to the gym may look like this for some of us, the 2-lane or 4-lane, highway. It may look like one of these neighborhood roads. It may be only dirt tire tracks. It doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong here. But this process of sort of the brain actually building these neural pathways and neural freeways, let's call them, just takes time. Again, a habit takes around 2 months to build. So this isn't just a metaphor. I know the metaphor, it's actually one of the most, I think, accurate, anatomically accurate metaphors of how this all works. But it works not just with behavioral habits, but also with emotional habits, or thought pattern habits. Another way of saying that is if you or a client, right, has a particular worry that often comes to mind, every time you run that worry in a thought loop or a thought bubble, essentially you're driving on that neural pathway. And as you drive on that neural pathway, you're essentially exercising that pathway. I'm gonna zoom down to the level of a neuron. I, again, promise this is as technical as we're gonna get here, but this is what a neuron looks like. All right. They look like trees. If you were a big giant and went outside and ripped out a tree and turned it sideways, that's essentially what the cells of our brain look like. They've got these branches on one side, and this is very, very simplified. There's actually about 5,000 to 10,000 branches per neuron. So this is really simplified here on the end. Then they've got this big long trunk, called an axon. And then out the end, you can't actually see it, but there are synaptic terminals or terminal buttons, which are essentially like the roots of the tree, right? Branches on the other end. So again, brain cells don't look like circles the way we learned in science class. They look like trees, which is really fascinating. One of the most interesting parts about a neuron is this substance on the trunk of the tree. I know a lot of you probably know this word, but for those who don't, it's just myelin sheath. And myelin is essentially pavement for your neurons. It's insulation for the neurons. It allows the signal to travel faster and more efficiently. So let me just give you a sense of the difference. A poorly insulated neuron, again, think of how insulation works like on a wire, right? The deeper or the better insulated is, the faster the signal and the less it leaks. It's really those two things, the stronger the signal. So a fully insulated neuron, an uninsulated neuron travels the signal of the neuron, right? Brain's a neurochemical system. So the neurotransmitters that are actually firing down the trunk of the tree travel at about 2 miles an hour. Again, without this myelin. Now, as you insulate the neuron and get it really strong, the equivalent of a really strong neuron, myelinated many, many layers deep, as you see, these kind of tree rings here, right? It can increase the speed at which the neuron fires by up to 200 miles an hour. So it can go from 2 miles an hour of firing to 200 miles an hour. They've actually clocked this. So that's 100-fold increase, right? So our brain's capacity for, and what I'm talking about is neuroplasticity. It's a form of neuroplasticity, of brain change. But this capacity of our brain to essentially rewire itself and become stronger, not just a little bit stronger, but dramatically stronger, working dramatically better, is just an inherent feature of our brains. Now, the question is, brains don't do anything they don't have to do. So your brain won't actualize that potential unless you do something. Your brain doesn't care who you are. It only cares what you do, said Daniel Coyle. It's a beautiful phrase. Brain doesn't care who you are. It only cares what you do. And then it responds to what you do by more deeply insulating these neurons, which is, again, the equivalent of paving those pathways so that they can travel more quickly and more efficiently. And over time, your brain will actually come to prefer those pathways. And that's when exercise becomes easy, because it's automatic and unconscious. Your brain likes traveling down it, not because it's good for you or bad for you, right? But because it's actually easy to travel on. It's like getting from Orange County to downtown LA. Think of like the best freeway with no traffic, right? Which I know is kind of hard to imagine in California. But think of it with no traffic and no cops, okay? You can go as fast as you want. That's what it's like, right? From point A to point B, it's going to take the freeway. It's not going to take these meandering roads to get from point A to point B because it's simply less efficient. Okay. This is what it looks like in a microscope for those who are kind of curious. This is looking down the axon. So these rings here are the myelin. The big takeaway, the most important thing to remember and to, again, work with clients on this concept, your brain is like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it gets. Now, again, sort of a side note, sometimes I share this with clients, sometimes I don't. But one of the ways your brain gets stronger is through the building of this. Myelin is actually fatty tissue. So as your brain gets stronger by building more fat, by getting fatter. I sort of find the paradox of that kind of awesome. All right. So here, this beautiful quote by William James, who's really the kind of father of modern American psychology, right? He said, you want to make your nervous system your ally instead of your enemy. William James talked a lot about habits and habit formation. And he realized that if you can get in the driver's seat of directing those habits, of actually designing and creating those habits, again, being the architect of your behavior and then your brain, that's how to harness your own nervous system toward your own goals, as opposed to working against it, right? Waking up and trying to decide whether or not you're going to exercise is essentially working against the natural logic of your nervous system. There's this beautiful quote by Gretchen Rubin, who wrote Better Than Before, a really great book on habits, Better Than Before. She said, you want to decide not to decide. So you want to make the decision once and then never make it again. Now, this isn't easy all the time. It's a little bit easier to do that with like, a drink of water first thing in the morning. It's a little harder with harder habits. But another way of saying this is once you decide on a habit, one of the best ways to make sure it locks in place is to make it kind of non-negotiable. It's to make it non-negotiable for those first 66 days. Right? You almost want to kind of coach your clients into, and again, set them up for success, right? Set them up in a way where you're going to hold them accountable and be there for them. Maybe that's a text every day, whatever that looks like. But a kind of extra heavy dose of support for those first 66 days so that, again, they won't get demotivated and fall off the wagon. If they can just be consistent for those first 2 months, it's really getting through those first 2 months, and then they'll start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, because after those first 2 months, it actually gets pretty easy. All right, couple problems. If all habit formation and behavior change was easy, as I just mentioned, we would all be amazing at it, right? So there's a couple problems that crop up. One is that motivation is like a roller coaster. So it's not reliable. It's not steady. I don't know if any of you have ever felt a 3 p.m. slump. but we all feel tired at times during our day. We all feel down. We all feel exhausted. We all feel like sometimes we're on our A game and sometimes we're on our Z game, right? We're all over the map. And that's actually quite natural. Energy ebbs and flows, and motivation is tightly linked to our energy. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is this kind of surprising finding that willpower runs out. And willpower is like, so willpower, think of it this way. It's like your cell phone battery. You actually use it up. And so eventually, right, you exhaust that battery and you have no more impulse control. What we call willpower or self-control. And so it's a bit of a paradigm shift to think of willpower in this way as an energy source, as opposed to what we usually think of it as. It's just like a character trait that's steady, yeah? But you've probably noticed it's much easier to resist Ben and Jerry's at 10 a.m. than at 10 p.m., right? Same thing with Netflix, right? We don't binge watch Netflix at 10 a.m. We binge watch at 10 p.m. And the question is why? Why do we do this? And it's because we're literally out of juice, out of willpower, out of self-control. And so it's very difficult to stop yourself when literally you have no more energy or juice or battery in the tank. Okay. So mini habits, this tool I mentioned at the beginning, are one of the very best ways to get around these problems and to get some momentum. Because again, what your clients and you, right, what we all need as we're trying, behavior change can be difficult. So what we need is a sense of I'm getting somewhere, a sense of progress, a sense of forward momentum, a sense of positive energy that like I'm making progress, and that fuels more progress. So mini habits are, again, one of the best ways to do this. So where did this research come from? Originally, it started out with Professor B.J. Fogg, who is a professor at Stanford. And he calls them tiny habits, by the way. But he's the director of the Persuasive Tech Lab at Stanford. And here's what got him thinking about this, right? He wanted to do some more exercise in his life. But he'd always, he'd had mixed success as far as doing this. So he decided, well, like a curious scientist, what if I totally just change the game? Instead of trying to get to the gym for an hour a day, why don't I just flip the script and why don't I just do 2 push-ups after I go pee every single time? Right? This is his habit, not mine. But go to the bathroom. We all go to the bathroom multiple times a day, right? So he knew he'd get maybe 10 to 15 push-ups, maybe 20 in a day. So he starts doing this, and first week goes really well. Again, 2 push-ups is so easy, it feels almost silly not to do it. It's kind of embarrassing not to do it. And so he does his 2 push-ups, goes back to his office. A couple hours later, goes to the bathroom, does his 2 push-ups, goes back to his office, and this goes on. So he's keeping track of how many push-ups he does on his calendar. He's keeping little, tick marks. And within 2 or 3 weeks, he's doing more in the range of like 40 to 50 push-ups a day, where he started out in the kind of 10 to 20, range. Within about a month, he's doing over 100 push-ups a day. And then over time, this number just keeps growing. So he's doing hundreds of push-ups a day. And he is surprised by the growth. What started out as this really, really tiny habit ended up having this really powerfully reinforcing and really positive outcome. So he starts looking at this. He starts talking about it. He starts asking other people if he can coach them on what he's been doing, this sort of thing. And here's what he finds in all of his research. Behavior change sort of follows this nice curve that you're looking at here. You've got these different dimensions, right? You've got motivation, right? Again, what, like I said, is kind of unreliable, but you've got high motivation at the top, low motivation at the bottom. And then on the horizontal axis, you've got level of difficulty. So hard to do over here, easy to do over here. Now, again, just to keep this simple, this example of drinking water to hydrate in the morning, this is an easy behavior. So, in order to cross this green threshold, okay, anything on this side, the up or to the right side of this green line, he would consider a habit success. You did what you intended to do, right? So again, drinking water in the morning, easy to do. You need low motivation, right? You could be sick. You're probably still going to do it, and you're still going to cross that green threshold and probably be successful at your habit. So right here is just as successful as right here. All that matters is you cross this green curved line. If that makes sense. Whereas, again, getting to the gym for an hour a day or some other kind of more difficult habit can be very difficult, right? So in order to get to the gym for an hour a day, you can have medium level motivation and still not make it across that green threshold. So you've got to have this really high level of motivation in order to cross over and again, be successful at your goal. And again, the challenge is that motivation is up and down. So again, how do you work around this? Well, I want to ask this question before we keep looking at that model, which I think is a really interesting graph. Any guesses on this question? How many New Year's resolutions fail every year? What percentage of time do you, or percentage of our attempts actually are non-successful? What do you guys think? Julie says 80%, Victoria 90%, Vicky 90%, Bethany 98%, Susan 95%. Wow, 95%. Jill, Mike says 90+%. Anna 95%. Yeah, I'm getting some skeptical responses. Like we're not collectively very good at changing our own behavior. I'm sure you know this from experience, and also trying to coach people through this process, right? Here's what the data say. You're very, very close. In fact, if I averaged all your scores, it would probably be about this. We fail 92% of the time in our New Year's resolutions. This is shocking. To me, it's shocking, right? It doesn't surprise me because, again, I've seen this in my own life. I've seen this in other people's lives. So it's not that I'm not surprised. But what's interesting is, again, the brain is very changeable. Behavior change should be this kind of doable thing. But the problem is most of us not been taught how, right? It's like, it's not that the brain can't change. It's actually that we're not skilled at behavior change, at least not yet, right? Where do you learn this? Do you learn it in school? Do you learn it in your family? Maybe if you pick up one or two good habits from your parents, if you're lucky. We're never directly taught behavior change and self-directed neuroplasticity. This is a new skill set. Knowing how the brain works and then working with the brain so that you can actually achieve your goals. It's a completely different way of thinking about this. So 92% of us fail. Again, why? Because, again, of this, basically this graph. Essentially, most of us start here in our New Year's resolutions. We're super ambitious. We've got a huge goal for how I'm going to exercise, how 2020 is going to be different. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to have, a social or relationship goal. I'm going to have a mental or cognitive goal. I'm going to have, these huge, we posted on social media. We're super proud of what we're going to change this year. So we bite off too much all at once. And so again, because motivation is up and down, sometimes we're on the wagon, sometimes we're off. This is week 2 or week 3, right? Week 3, maybe we're back on, right? But then we yo-yo. And by mid to late February, we're back here and we're really discouraged because all of that, it's like whiplash. It's like behavior change whiplash. And it feels like our self-efficacy, our confidence that we can do it just plummets, right? We end there because that up and down feeling just doesn't feel good. So again, BJ Fogg's like, well, why don't we just flip the script? Why don't we literally just start here with mini habits where it's really easy and then see if they'll grow. And again, according to his experience and his research, they often don't stay here in terms of how big the habit is. They actually grow. And the question is how. So these are the 5 reasons that mini habits work, why they're a winning strategy. Number 1 is mini habits actually build consistency. So consistency is king, right? When you think about what it is that's going to have the biggest bang for my buck in terms of what I'm working on with my client, it's really finding a way, a system and a support, different ways of supporting your client to maintain the consistency. And if you do that, they will literally become something different because of the way neuroplasticity works, right? Repetition is the mother of all learning. Repetition is what signals to your brain, this is important enough to invest resources like myelin. Aristotle said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. So consistency is really, really powerful. And I want to kind of just compare the difference between intensity and consistency. Yeah. Consistency is really the best way, again, to build habits. It's not that intensity, most of us, when we're trying to change our lives, we'll go to a weekend kind of conference or workshop, a kind of a getaway, that sort of thing. And we'll have this really amazing insights. We'll have really amazing insights about ourselves, about what we need to change, our goals, that sort of thing. But the problem with intensity is it doesn't lead to change. It might lead to a change in paradigm. It might lead to a change in, again, the way we see ourselves. And all of that's really positive. I'm not saying that's not good. In fact, in many ways, I think those types of experience can be a great catalyst. But it's really just the beginning. It's that daily doing that actually builds the habit over time. So again, if in doubt, or when you're in that low point, or your client's in that low point, remember this phrase: consistency beats intensity every time. Another way of saying that is, even if the quality of that day's meditation, let's say meditation is the new habit, is not going to be that good, right? Let's say, and this happens to me, right? Sometimes I'll be meditating in my morning routine, and my 6-year-old will get up earlier than she usually does, and midway through my meditation, she'll come and, she knows that I meditate. She loves Headspace and what, the app I use and whatever. But she'll often just jump on my lap with me, and sometimes I'll put one, earbud into her ear, and we'll kind of listen to Andy Pettycombe together. But I'll just finish the meditation, try to be as pleasant as possible as I can with her, but at the same time, actually do the habit and finish it. And she knows what I'm doing enough that she knows what's going on. But it's not that high of a quality because it's interrupted, and I'm focusing on her and not I'm breathing, and you guys get what I'm saying. But again, it doesn't matter. What matters is that I did it that day. Over time, this is a long game, right? Quality comes over time, not every single time. All right. I just want you to notice, what do you notice about, these are my workout clothes, right? Every morning, I go for a 20-minute run first thing in the morning. But what do you notice about where these, my workout clothes are, or what's going on here? Thoughts? Convenient and organized. By the way, April says queen. I love that. Thank you. Queen of consistency is queen. Thank you, April. I appreciate that. Victoria, convenient and organized. Susan, first thing you see next to your bed, set up for success. No excuses. It's right there by the bedside and organized. Yeah, it looks nice, right? It's organized. Essentially, this is acting. Two big things are happening, right? For those, I hope your shoes don't smell. Yeah, I hope they don't either. um, uh, or we're not going to sleep very well, right? But two things are happening, right? One is that they act like a cue. So again, for anybody who's read The Power of Habit, Charles Duhigg's lovely book, he breaks it down as a cue, just like a trigger or a reminder, is the first step in the habit loop, right? So a cue is just what reminds you and says, hey, it's time to do this thing. And usually, ideally, they're external. They're things in the environment that you can actually see and that are physical. Those are the kind of the best kind of cues. Not the only kind of cues, but they work really well. So that's the first thing is I wake up and literally my eyes are already looking at them the first thing I see. The second thing, this is recommendation from Sean Achor in his book, The Happiness Advantage, is it makes it about 30 seconds easier, right? I don't have to stumble in the dark into the closet. I don't have to, it's not, if it's cold, it's just easier to put it on. And that 30 seconds when you're nice and warm under your down comforter or your blanket makes a big difference to a sleepy and tired brain, right? I'm not a morning person. I don't necessarily pop out of bed the way larks do, but it gives me no excuses. All right, we'll get back to those cues and triggers. All right, number 2, mini habits guarantee success. So success, this feeling, again, think of BJ Fogg's example of doing those 2 push-ups, right? Every time you do those 2 push-ups, it gives you this feeling of winning, of hitting the goal. Even though it's small, your brain really doesn't differentiate between big goals and small goals. It just knows whether or not you hit them. And if you do, it feels really good and releases a lot of endorphins and other positive neurochemicals, okay? So self-efficacy is this idea, it's really just confidence in your belief in your ability to influence an outcome. So self-efficacy is the scientific word. If I were to use, everyday language, I would just call it confidence, right? How confident are you that you can achieve the goal you're setting out to achieve? And so when you are successful at achieving it or hitting it, you get this kind of surge of self-efficacy. Now, self-efficacy is really powerful. Why? So this is Albert Bandura, probably one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. He's also at Stanford. He at the end of his, he did a lot of work on modeling, on how we learn, on social learning originally, and then he studied phobias and a whole host of different things. And what he realized is when people got better and in control of their own kind of behavior and minds, they started growing this confidence that they could do it again. So he realized that this is a real phenomenon, and it was called, he kind of labeled it self-efficacy. He spent the last basically decade of his career studying this because self-efficacy is this sort of magic elixir of motivation. If you've got it, you'll stay motivated. If you don't, you'll give up more easily. It's the thing that if you have it, you'll keep pursuing the goal even when it gets difficult, because you're confident you can actually be successful at it. Well, how do you build self-efficacy? If it's this magic thing, if it's really one of these secret X factors, right, in behavior change, how do you build it? So after lots of research, lots of studies, lots of time in the lab measuring this, here's what he came up with. Small wins, small successes. Every time you have a small success, and again, think back to the 2 push-ups, every time you have a small success, it builds on itself and gives you this feeling that I've got this, right? It's a form of resilience. It actually gives you this sort of embodied sense that you can tackle anything in your life and you'll be successful at it. I want to share this example because I think it's a brilliant example. Jerry Seinfeld, obviously a very funny human. how this young comedian who said, Jerry, how'd you become so funny? And he goes, well, I just write jokes every day. And he goes, yeah, Jerry, we all write jokes every day. Come on, man. Like, what's your method? Like, how do you're like a clear step above the rest of us. Like, how do you do what you do? And he goes, well, he had to think about it. He goes, well, I guess I do have this kind of system. And he said, every day that I write jokes, I actually literally print out a blank calendar, right? He literally, this is Jerry Seinfeld. He Googles blank calendar, prints out, a calendar. And then every day that he writes jokes, he puts a big red X on that day. He writes jokes for an hour or two a day or whatever his time is. And then he's basically done for the day. And then he said this. He said, after a few days, you'll have a chain. Just keep at it, and the chain will grow longer every day. You'll like seeing that chain, especially when you get a few weeks under your belt. Your only job is to not break the chain. This is brilliant for a number of reasons. Probably the biggest is the sense of progress, right? Teresa Mabel at Harvard Business School has also shown that one of the deepest well springs of our motivation is a sense of visual progress. One of the biggest problems we have when we're trying to do self-improvement or behavior change is we can't really see the progress. If anybody's tried to, slim down their waistline, you know how long that takes, right? 6-packs don't emerge overnight. I wish they did. It's really hard to see. But this externalizes into a system visual progress. So you can actually see yourself getting better at something by virtue of having checked, the day or made an X on that day. It's evidence to your brain that you're getting better at something. All right. Number 3, many habits build motivation. So one of the ways it builds motivation is what we just talked about. But another way is that motivation often follows action. It often comes after action instead of before. Now, this is a tricky one, right? Because again, when we are feeling unmotivated, we forget that we shouldn't wait to feel motivated to do something. We should start doing the something and then decide if we feel motivated to do it. Does that make sense? So if I'm on the couch, again, watching a really great Netflix series and I haven't done my workout for the day, I'm not going to feel like doing my workout for the day by trying to think my way into it. But if I take a quick walk around my little block, or even within my house, just get up and start walking around, and then in that state of movement, then make the decision, I'm going to feel a lot different. I'm just going to show up as a different version of me. All right. Again, many habits start at this kind of lower place, which are easier to do. And again, they grow over time. The question is how, why do many habits actually grow? Some people ask me, did BJ Fogg, drink a lot of water, so he has to go to the bathroom a lot more? Is that why he's doing more push-ups? No, that's not why he's doing more push-ups. The reason he's doing more push-ups every time is because of the bonus reps. So what happens is you hit the 2 push-ups, right? And then you're going through all the trouble to get down on the ground, and get into the position of doing a push-up. And then suddenly your brain's like, you hit the goal and your brain's like, well, I went through all the work to get down here, so might as well throw in 5 more, right? And so this is what brains do, and it's like a double win for your brain. You hit the goal, plus you did extra, and so your brain's literally, it's like fireworks are going off, as they should be, right? It's that positive emotional response that actually fuels the future behavior. All right, number 4, and after this, I want to go into Q&A, okay? Number 4, many habits build willpower. So this little battery I talked about, how willpower is like an energy source, you can actually grow the size of your battery. And I think that's really cool, right? You can, I've got I'm trying to think of a good analogy. So I think the latest iPhones, like the iPhone X, iPhone 10s, have these kind of longer battery lives. My battery life, I've got an SE, like a 6, and so my battery life is definitely the smaller version. I'm always having to carry around these little recharge packs. But you can actually increase the size of your battery, the amount of willpower or self-control. These exercises in the daily doing actually strengthen those self-control muscles, which are largely behind your forehead. All right. Last thing that mini habits do is they boost autonomy and flexibility. All right. So another way of saying this is you can take them on vacation and they don't break. They're flexible. BJ Fogg says you want to make them small and flexible, not big and brittle. The other thing is they increase the autonomy, because if you only want to do the 2 push-ups, you can, right? But if you want to do more, if you want to do 20 push-ups because you're feeling really good, or even 50, you can do that. You always have that element of choice, which ends up being really critical to human motivation. All right, so how do you set them up? How do you set them up? And then we'll go into Q&A. 3 tips for setting up your mini habits. After I blank, then I will blank. This particular sentence is probably, I'm going to write down one thing during this whole session. This is probably the sentence I would write down. After I open the fridge, then I will eat 1 carrot stick. After I get out of the shower, then I will meditate for 5 minutes. After I brush my teeth, then I will write down 3 things I'm grateful for in my gratitude journal. After my feet hit the floor, then I will go for my 10-minute walk. After I sit in my car, then I will listen to Audible instead of the radio. After I blank, then I will blank. Again, it's infinitely flexible, but this is really the habit formula. It's the miniature program that if you say this to yourself 3 or 4 times, and in the beginning, again, you want to keep it as present as possible. Sometimes I ask people to stick it on a sticky note, put it in their mirror, on front of their mirror, or at their computer, just to keep reminding themselves of the new habit seed, because that's all it is at this point. It's just a seed. You will program over time. This will program you to start seeing behaviors that you already do, because we do lots of things the same every day. We eat 3 meals a day. We get dressed. We go to the bathroom. We shower. We go to work. We come home. We do all these different things. We have a nighttime and a morning time routine usually. This is like habit stacking, right? So you're just piggybacking a new habit on top of an already existing behavior that happens in your life. All right. Number 2, you want to celebrate progress. And again, as good coaches, I know you probably already do this with your clients, but you want to encourage your clients to do this as well. Right? We have an overly stern internal taskmaster often. You want to, as best as possible, celebrate. BJ Fogg says, tell yourself you're awesome. I'm awesome. I did that, right? You don't have to do it out loud, but do it in your mind. And that actually encourages the neuroplasticity. The positive neurochemicals will actually foster faster brain growth. And the last thing is you really don't want to work on more than around 2 to 4 mini habits at a time. I find 3 habits to be kind of the sweet spot. In that calendar system that I mentioned, I'll often divide it into 4 squares. So each day into 4 squares, and each square represents a different habit. And then the 4th square is me texting my accountability partner, telling him that I did it for the day. So that's an X for that text that I send to him. Marion mentioned accountability partners. This is one of the most powerful ways to, of course, encourage people to do this. Okay, so with that, I want to go into Q&A. What questions do you guys have? What questions come up? By the way, as you're thinking about questions, I just put this up here just so you know. This is a 1 session from a 12 session 3-course series that I do. So if anybody's interested in needs more ICF credits, it's 22.5 continuing coach education credits. It's a credited course. And the website for that is just coaches.brainbydesign.com. Again, for anybody who's looking right now. Other questions, how this applies for you or for your clients?
Hi, James. This is Dave. It's a fascinating topic. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
This is not the end. I'm just pondering. I think when I was listening, I was kind of thinking, how am I going to apply this in my life? So I'm curious as to what other people on the call have kind of come up with as their next step in terms of forming a mini habit. So if you want to type that, if people want to type that in the chat, that would be interesting.
Bethany says, in terms of coaching process, are you teaching first, then coaching with questions, etc.? So how do I go about kind of the order and how this kind of works? Yeah, so it always depends on where somebody's coming to me from and how much kind of understanding they have of this. It's a great question, Bethany. My first rule whenever I'm doing this with myself is I want to keep this as simple as possible. So if I'm working with someone on a one-off coaching session, which is occasionally the case, it's not usually the case, but I want them to walk away with an entire, like a plan, right? And so in those cases, I'm usually actually bringing the kind of calendar system. I'm usually having them divide up the days. We're brainstorming and working through possible mini habits. I want them to actually walk away with an actionable, step-by-step way to actually implement this. So that's again, like a one-time kind of coaching session. For sure, I'm doing a lot of kind of motivational interviewing kind of questions, right? Just open-ended questions, affirming, restating what they've said, and then summarizing, so that they can come to it on their own, to your point about asking questions. Because it really matters that these goals matter to them, of course. And you know, we all know that. Again, if I can let them see the sort of, even this presentation outside of our coaching time, I'll often do that. I know everybody doesn't have that resource, but you know, another way of doing that is maybe even just, you know, BJ Fogg's TED Talk, which is a really nice. He has 2 TED Talks, but his first one is really good on this, that sort of thing. So I'm trying to do as much of the kind of learning about habits outside of our coaching session, and then tailoring within the coaching session as much as we can. Another great resource on this is actually the book called Mini Habits by Stephen Guise, Guise. It's about a 120-page read. It's super short, very, very, very helpful. All right. Natalie says, I've been able to really change my habit regarding exercise. I want to create a habit towards meditation. Hope this answers your question, Dave. With what TED Talk are you referring to? For the TED Talk, just type in BJ Fogg, Mini Habits. Fogg is his last name. And that will come up. I'm not sure of the exact URL off the top of my head. Thank you, Vicky. Very good. And Natalie, in terms of a habit towards meditation, my experience so far is really that the experience is the same as exercise, meaning that tell me, Natalie, if there's a way you can clarify the question or expand on it a little bit. I would love that. but effectively, behavior change, whether it's exercise or whether it's creating a gratitude journal or whatever it is, what's happening in the brain is very, very similar. And so you're wanting to essentially follow the same principles. Again, that sentence, after I blank, then I will blank. So doing that habit stacking thing. And then squeezing in, I would start small. Maximum 10 minutes of meditation as a starting point. You can start smaller, 5 minutes if that's more realistic. But I would use an app like Headspace or Calm or any of these others. And then, again, work them up or yourself up from there. Anna says, I plan to exercise when my kids are falling asleep and meditate 10 minutes as soon as kids leave to school. All right. These are ways people are wanting to implement them. Yep, I get that based on the question. Excellent. The only thing I would say, Anna, be careful on the vigorous exercise. Too late can be a little tricky on getting to sleep. You want to, as best you can, depending on what time your kids go to sleep and what time you go to sleep, make that at least kind of a 2-hour window before you be kind of done with your exercise, ideally 2 hours before you go to bed. But again, just watch that, I guess, on sleep. But for sure, some exercise is always, late exercise is always better than no exercise. So if that's the only time you can squeeze it in, I would say do it.
It's wonderful that we're all so engaged, and I don't want to stifle the enthusiasm, but just in case anyone needs to leave dead on 12, I just wanted to give you the password because you are eligible for CCEUs for attending this webinar, and the password is heart train. And if you have a problem with my accent, that is heart, as in the thing that pounds in your head, no, in your chest, sorry. The thing that pounds in your chest, the circulatory organ, heart, and then train as in choo-choo. And that was courtesy of a random word generator. Some of the other options were a little odd. Carry on.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate the American accent. That was very, very well executed. Amy says, heart train, one word, question mark. Is that right?
Doesn't matter.
I guess it doesn't matter, Amy. All right, let me just make sure I'm not missing any of these questions. Again, yes, if anybody needs to leave, feel free to leave. We'll just try to finish these questions here.
So will we have access to your presentation, asks Carrie.
Yes, I can find a way to make that available. Mm-hmm.
Cool, that would be wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right, so Natalie, we've got lots of good comments here. Hang tight. So Natalie, I have a habit for physical health, but still feel pretty scattered throughout the day, and more focus would help. And I would love to create a habit for mental health too. Yep, love it. I won't say much more there other than, again, physical health and mental health end up reinforcing each other, as you probably already know. But treat the mental habit, meditation, what you referred to, as very, very, very similar to what you've done with your exercise. And my guess is you're going to probably find success there. Vicky says, I see you have a program after this presentation for ICF CCEs available for coaches. Are you interested in doing the same presentation in another ICF chapter, for example, High Country chapter in November? For sure, Vicky. Yep, reach out to me. My email is just james@brainbydesign.com. james@brainbydesign.com. Thank you for that, Vicky.
How exciting that you get to speak to another chapter. That's wonderful.
Yep, wonderful.
Someone has asked what they have to do with their password. We'll get an email later that will tell you what to do and how to get your CCEU.
Somehow I haven't been able to create a queue, and the bonus is not clear yet. My brain just feels like it's a waste of time at that point. I assume, Natalie, that's the queue. Yeah, one. Again, there's lots of ways to help with meditation. Apps really help. I also use a Muse headband. I happen to have it right now because I was interviewing the founder, Ariel Garten, this morning on my podcast. But these types of tech, can help. Give neurofeedback with meditation. So if you're struggling to see progress, that's actually what choosemuse.com is their website, but it gives you, basically reads your electrical activity of your brain and basically says if your mind tells you through sound feedback if your mind is wandering or if it's kind of in a focused state. So it helps. It's like holding up a mirror to your brain, telling you how you're doing, and then you can kind of track progress a little bit better. So that's a nice help when it comes to meditation. Let's switch my heart rate monitor. We will have access to power. Yep. Where should the passcode be placed for the CCUs? Thank you. You bet. Carrie, Regina, everybody. Yep. Natalie, great presentation. How much is the course, James? Heard of that. Music, very good. Yes. So the course, for those who are asking about the course, it's $447 for the full course. It's 12 recorded sessions, and then we have 6 live sessions. It's a pretty involved and pretty detailed course, but it's really a crash course on the brain science. It's very similar to the kind of content we're doing now, but there's 4 sessions on habits, 4 on productivity, the science of productivity, and 4 on the science of happiness and positive psychology. So it's very similar again to what we've been doing now, but it's designed specifically for coaches. So a lot of the live sessions, what we're getting into is how this applies in your practice. All right. Any other questions? I think we're probably okay to wrap up unless there's any other questions or if I can be helpful in any other way.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much, James.
You bet.
And I'm really glad that some other opportunities are already coming your way through this. Speaking of opportunities, we have another webinar on September the 17th, which is about finding your edge, what clients look for in a coaching relationship. So some insights there into clients. And then on the 26th, if you are in Orange County, or if you feel like a trip to Orange County, we have a live chapter meeting on the 26th at 6 p.m. in Irvine, where you'll have the opportunity to network, meet other coaches, share your experiences, and there's also a live speaker and food and drink. So really look forward to seeing anyone who can make it to that. Thanks again, James, and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.